Welcome everyone to Unit 5, Lesson 3. Today, we're going to be talking about the antebellum reform movements, the changes that are going to happen following the cultural movements within society. For our essential idea, we're going to be talking about how the cultural impacts from the last lesson are going to impact reform movements that we're going to see that attempt to fix issues within society. For your essential question, you're going to be determining which of the movements were effective during this time period. Now, what's important to understand is that several things are going to impact the reform movement. While we will see some of the same things from yesterday, it's important to understand that during the era of the common man, or this Jacksonian era, we're still going to be seeing people focus on this issue of universal improvement. We're going to be seeing people push for more equality, which started with universal white male suffrage. Andrew Jackson proposed this concept of the common man, and he's going to use that to ride into the White House. But because of this, common people are going to gain more influence in government. And because of that influence, they're going to be able to start changing things that they think are wrong. The second thing that we're going to see is the Second Great Awakening, in which people are going to be refocusing on religion, particularly religion that focuses on themselves and not the authority of others. As we see religion start to grow, we're going to see more people want to change the influence of society, to get rid of the sins of society, particularly the sin of slavery. Combined, we're going to see these two influences work together to create a period of reform. With this reform, we're going to see people gaining more power in government and religion, and using that power to reform society. Places that we're going to see these reforms are going to be in the treatment of the mentally ill, in prison conditions, in education, in the abuse of alcohol or the temperance movement, and in slavery. We're also going to see women attempt to gain more power, beginning with the push for equal rights and the right to vote. When we look into the treatment of the mentally ill and in mental hospitals, we have to thank Dorothea Dix, who is going to expose the inhumane treatment of the mentally ill at this time period. We're going to see the creation of mental hospitals, which gets rid of the need to put the mentally ill into prison. And this will attempt to give proper mental illness help. The problem is, we're still pretty early in the understanding of mental illness and how to treat it. So we will see some rough tactics like lobotomy still being used, or literally drilling a hole into a person's head to try and fix mental illness. Dorothea Dix is also going to be responsible for the fixing of prison issues. We're going to see prisoners being treated inhumanely at this time period, with many people being put in prison just for being in debt. To fix this issue, we're going to see more focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment. And we're going to see the abolishment of debtor's prison, which means that if you're in debt, you'd no longer be put in jail for it. We're also going to see improvements when it comes to public education. And that's going to be because of one man, Horace Mann, who's going to create the push for tax-funded schools that would require attendance. While this is not necessarily going to be a large-scale change that requires all students to come in, this will try to make education more accessible for people who are not necessarily wealthy. He is believing that the country can only survive if the citizens are educated. And as we move into the coming decades, we're going to see improvement on that concept. We will also see a fight against alcohol abuse, as people see alcohol to be one of the roots of society's problems. This will create the temperance movement, which is calling for the moderation of alcohol use, not the complete abolition of alcohol use. The American Temperance Society is going to try and convince many different areas to reduce alcohol use, and some states would even ban the sale of liquor at this time period. As you look at this image, you can see how some people view the progress of alcoholism and how it leads from a simple drink with a friend all the way to even committing suicide. While it's not necessarily always that drastic, it does change certain people's perspectives of alcohol, particularly women in the household. We're also going to see women's rights movement pick up because of the Industrial Revolution. The roles of men and women everywhere are going to change because of industrialization. And this will create what's known as the separate spheres. For men, their sphere is going to be leaving home to work in factories. They will make the money, and they're going to be active outside of their home, both in politics and in reform. For women, they're going to stay at home and care for the children and the house. They don't necessarily leave the home, and they're not generally going to be active in certain movements. Despite those spheres, women are going to see society as an extension of the home. Their children that they care for are still going to have to be cared for in society. So they see it as their motherly role to make sure that society is as good as it can be. And this becomes a second role of reform for women. They're going to be following the role of men in the era of the common man and seek to gain more power in government and in society. This is going to be seen in the women's rights movement, which starts at the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, in which women come together to try and create more political power for themselves. They will create a Declaration of Sentiments, which declare that men and women should be equal. And it's also going to be laid out in the same way that we'd see the Declaration of Independence. One key figure that we're going to see from this is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who's going to demand women's suffrage or the right to vote. With this, however, we're going to see this be generally overshadowed by other movements, particularly the movement for abolition. This will eventually pick back up, but will not become mainstream until we get all the way to the early 1900s. The final thing that we're going to see is abolition, or the call to end slavery. This is going to be the biggest and the most divisive issue that we'll see of reform. This tension is not going to go away, and will eventually be perhaps the main catalyst towards the Civil War. This whole movement of abolition we're going to focus on Monday, seeing its rise and the key figures that are going to be important in that movement. Thank you guys. I will see you then.